Today we will discuss the Old English literature and the important characteristics and events that happened in that era. So here is the timeline of Old English literature from the Roman invasion to the Norman conquest. So if we look at the history of Old English literature, so it will drag us back when it was inhabited by the Celtic speaking people named as Britons. So when Julius Caesar in 43 BCE conquered this land and it became the province of Roman Empire, so they named it Britannia because people in that area were speaking Celtic language. So after that conquest, it was being ruled by Roman Empire up to 2 centuries. And when Roman Empire was in decline in the early 5th century, so legions were pulled out from England during the 5th century in a vain attempt to protect Rome itself from the threat of Germanic conquest. So the island was left vulnerable in the hands of Scotland's Picts. So Scots Picts attacks this island so often, so the people living in that area called for help from the Germanic tribes, which are Angles, Saxon, and Jutes. So the name English is also derived from these angels. So these people were speaking English language. So when they arrived in England, so they divided the land into different parts. So instead of helping the English people, they conquered the land and they were fighting against the Celtic people, and they named it, they divided the England into different parts like Essex, East Anglia, Northumbria, Mercia. Okay, so after that, now these people were the Germanic tribes and they had a pagan belief. They believe in many gods. They were warriors and they have different lifestyle from the native Britons, because Britons have adapted themselves to the norms and the religious culture to the Roman Empire, and by religion they were Christian. However, these Germanic tribes were, you know, they were they do not believe in one god. They have different gods for different purposes. So now England was in the hand of these barbarian tribes. So after that, an important event happened in 597 AD when Saint Augustine arrived in Kent and introduced the Christianity. So we will discuss the effects of the Christianity on the literature, and after that we will discuss the reign of King Alfred from 871 to 889. So King Alfred has contributed a lot in the history of English literature and in the prose. So he revived the English language, and after that, the Norman conquest. So we will discuss it. So these tribes, Anglo-Saxon and Jutes, so they took the England in 450 AD, but their occupation was not sudden. It took centuries to take over all the England, but as they arrived in that areas wherever they have been reached, so before that their Christianity was practiced there, but as soon as they arrived there, so Christianity was remained in only remote areas where farmer only exercise those rituals. So in contrast, these tribes with themselves brought a new type of culture, literature, and they introduced the oral literature in in English history, and so their culture was also different, their lifestyle, so their themes were different from the old English. Like if we look at the writers of Christian writers, so their themes would be on the eternal life, Christ, and the miracle of Christ, or you know how to spend your life on the religious teaching, whereas the Anglo-Saxon has opposite, quite opposite. Like for them, the life is to be lived like a warrior. They do not want to be die on the bed. They always wish that they should be die on the battlefield. uh, that was considered as an honor. So there was a difference of these things. So that made a problem. So in in order to solve this problem, Saint Augustine arrived in England, and which introduced a Christianity, and which has influence on the language also. So after these tribes have adopted themselves to Christianity, so Christianity brings changes in literature in many ways. So first of all, they have no written language, so they do not know how to write or how to read something. So after Christianity, the monks started writing the miracle and the mysteries of uh, Jesus Christ, and that was the reason that old English literature revolves around religion. There's no themes which represent the society or the secular things, and the pen was in the hands of monk. And mostly, there are religious writer. Almost every work of old English literature is written by anonymous, and few works if we have, so they are Christian by religion. So these are the reasons, and these are the impacts of Christianity on the literature. So an evident of that is, after the Christianity was introduced, there was a code of law which was published by the first king of England. Okay, so this is the reason, and this is the impact that Christianity had on literature. So, historians often consider Old English literature as the Dark Ages because they have not produced that work if we compare that with age from 450 to 1066. So there are some reasons, because at that time there were a constant invasion to England. People all over from all over the world were coming to invade this country, and people were at constant war, so they don't have enough time to think and write. Second reason is, so if we have few manuscripts of old English literature, so manuscripts were expensive, so not every person can afford that manuscript. So there was a tradition of old English literature. So nevertheless, it is not the case that they have few masterpieces, and they are, if you count them, so they are 400 in number. So their poetry dominated the old English literature. The reason was poetry was easy to remember as compared to prose. So they were the people of old English literature were uh, more in favor of poetry. They consider poetry as a sacred thing. So if we analyze and if we categorize the works of old English literature, so it will fall into four manuscripts. The first one is the Exeter book, which contains 130 poems, in which there are the love poems, there are riddles, and the Junius manuscripts. And in this, the work of Caedmon, uh, known as Christ and Satan, is also there. So the Virgili book, The Dream of the Root, so in which a cross speaks as a Christ. Okay, it's a Beowulf manuscript. Almost every work which is found from the Old English literature is incomplete, but the Beowulf is a complete manuscript. Although the writer is unknown, but they gave the name of the character to this epic. So if we talk about the subject matter of Old English literature, so these tribes brought with themselves a tradition of oral poetry. Before the Christianity, there was nothing written, and only the servants or the monks of the church was allowed to read and write. And so, if keeping the cultural and social background of these tribes in mind, we will come to know that their themes were different from each other. The Germanic tribes often talk about bravery in their poetry, warfare, battlefield, and uh, they gave more importance to loyalty. They would die for their slain king. And on the other hand, if we talk about the Christianity poetry, they have different subject matter. They would talk about eternal life, the fall of Adam and Eve, the fall of Satan. So how to live life according to the teaching of biblical stories. according to Bible. So another poem, at the same time, they have personal poems in which the themes were on the romantic and adventures, like the seafarer, okay, the lament. So these were also written down at that time, but only a few manuscripts we have found. So they are in old English literature. They have written things in riddles. We have often found this style in old English literature. So when it comes to the writers of old English literature, Alfred the Great occupies the first place, and there are certain reasons. The first reason is he was the most active king of England at that time, and his reign time was from 1871 and 1899, and he was a person who united the all kings of England to fight against the Danes in the War of Maldon, and these Danes has occupied almost all the northern areas, and what they were threatening to take hold the England. So keeping that sense, he was the most famous king, and he was a person who saved England from these dens. And most importantly, if we talk about his contribution in literature, so he introduced prose in Old English literature, and he was very interested to teach people, and he wanted people to speak vernacular language, Old English language, and he himself translated a lot of work from Roman and Latin, and his famous work was Consolation of Philosophy, and he introduced the tradition of chronicles in which historians write about the life of kings and queens and their works in their reign, the social and political life. So these were the contribution of Alfred the Great. And the second, Bede. Bede was a historian. Basically, he was a monk at the church, and he was known for his most famous work, which is Ecclesiastical History of English People. And in his in this book, he wrote about how these tribes arrived in England, how they occupy England, and how they impose their culture. And all these things we are studying is with the help of this text, Ecclesiastical History of English People. So there is another writer which are Christian religious writers, Cynewulf and Caedmon. So Cynewulf was a religious poet. He often talked about in his poem about the biblical stories, uh, the miracle and mysteries of Christ, and how this world was created, and how this world was created in 7 days. Like all these biblical teachings, and there was a interesting story connected to the Caedmon. Beatty mentioned in his ecclesiastical history of English people that he was a illiterate person who was appointed by the church monastery, and where he often listened to the teaching, biblical teaching, and he had a gift of changing the teaching into the songs. So in this way, it was not art he learned, but he was gifted this gift, and he often tried to imitate those teachings in the words in the song. So he write Haim, the creation of world, and the Battle of Maldon, and uh, these both writers have one thing in common: their themes were on the eternal life, the after the life after death, and their themes revolve around the religious uh, teachings. So they often conduct sermons and things like that. So here you can see the clear distinction between the poetry of old English literature. So the writers I have discussed right now, that the Catman and Cynewulf, their topics were religious, like Dream of the Root, in which Cross is speaking as a Christ. Okay, so Catman signed the creation of world, and they have the life of Christ, the life of saints, uh, and eternal life. On the other hand, Germanic tribes, they have subject of heroic. Uh, they would fight for honor. They believed they wished be to be killed in the battlefield. So they have different vision. And another example is a Beowulf, an epic poem which is considered a national epic poem of English. So it is also written in heroic form, and a hero who kills a monster and the mother of monster. So they follow the rules and the culture of these tribes. So their themes were warfare. They would fight for their people. So they lived their life for kings and their chieftains. They would devote their life, and in this time, the people were considered as to be more cheerful, yeah, eating and drinking in mead hall, and women have no rights, no status at that time. They were considered like nothing, just making them these people happy and content. So these were the differences between the Old English poetry. So when it comes to the diction and the figurative language of poetry, so Old English was rich with synonyms, words. The heroic couplet, the epics followed the alliteration, the emphasis on something, and it also included metaphor, simile, and metonymy. The most important thing, because metonymy is a kind of device for comparing two things which have similar functions or similar things like ship and iron. They have something common, and like sword they would say warfare and same time battlefield. And so these were the devices which were used in the Old English poetry. They often use compound words like holy creator, mankind guardian for one thing. So they are the English. You can imagine how rich Old English language was. So this was the poetic and poetic diction. So William the Bastard entered in England in 1066 with 7,000 ships. When he heard that Edward uh, Edward the Confessor, his cousin, has promised the kingdom to Harold Godwinson. So, and at that time, Haroldson, the last king of Anglo-Saxon, was fighting with the Danes, and at the same time, William the Bastard invaded England. And at the place of Hastings, this war is known as Battle of Hastings, in which Godwinson was defeated, and thus the period of Anglo-Norman started.